Why are councils so hard up? Should smartphones be banned for children? And it's Prime Minister's questions at noon. This is Politics Live. With me in the studio, Conservative MP Miriam Cates, Labour MP Margaret Hodge, Liberal Democrat MP Wendy Chamberlain and Camilla Tominey from the Daily Telegraph. Today, why are so many councils putting up the council tax while still cutting services?
We're paying more council tax, we're getting less services, and our councils are edging ever further towards bankruptcy.
We'll be speaking to the leader of Birmingham Council, where planned cuts have left the city reeling. Should smartphones be banned for under 16s? This MP thinks they should. I'll be asking her why. Welsh farmers are protesting in Cardiff this lunchtime. Why are they so angry? And we'll have all the action from Prime Minister's questions live at midday. Welcome. Let's start with this headline reporting the Home Secretary in The Times, James Cleverly, saying, "You've made your point. Now end Gaza protests." The Home Secretary argues that pro-Palestinian demonstrators are not saying anything new. Is the Home Secretary right, Miriam?
Well, I think he's right that the process needs to stop, but not because they've made their point, but because they've become a national security threat. I think we saw that last week. I think we're seeing that in what British Jews are saying about not feeling safe. They are radicalising events in themselves. And when we have a genocidal slogan projected onto the Elizabeth Tower, enough is enough. These can't carry on.
Right, you're referring to the protest last week while MPs were supposed to be debating the Gaza, or calls for a Gaza ceasefire. Now, these demonstrations and protests have continued regularly in cities across the country. Is the Home Secretary right? They've made their point, they should stop.
No, I think the right to protest is absolutely central in a democracy. And I think actually the police in London, which are the ones I've seen, are doing an incredibly good job at protecting us in an incredibly difficult and fraught and polarising situation. And if it's for us three, certainly, and actually Camilla it goes to as well, we are all sort of leaders in our community, in the community. So what we say is really important, and that you should use our words not to inflame the situation. And I don't usually do this, but I have brought Suella Braverman's latest words. The truth is that the Islamists, the extremists and the anti-Semites are in charge now. And that they have bullied the Labour Party, they've bullied our institutions, and now they have bullied our country into submission. Those words inflame, and I think it's that creates the tensions. It enables the extremists to thrive and prosper.
Suella Braverman is a Conservative MP.
That's what you and I should be doing, Miriam.
Well, I think, of course, the right to protest is important, but there do have to be limits, and there were limits in terms of whether or not extreme environmentalists can superglue themselves to motorways and things like that. And I think they have crossed the line in terms of disrupting society, but also becoming radicalising events. But we want our politicians to have free speech. You might not agree with what these people have said, but we need our politicians to be able to speak freely. And we know that these demonstrations, that the pressure being put on politicians, particularly in your party, by some of these people, has got to the point where politicians are afraid to speak freely. Right, that in itself is a threat to democracy.
I want to get to the other guests quickly. Wendy, there is a cost issue, according to the Home Affairs Committee of MPs, who have found that £25 million has been spent policing pro-Palestinian protests since October the 7th. Is that worth taking into consideration?
I think it comes back to Margaret's points about the democratic right to protest, and it's really important that the police are there to facilitate that. I was on the Bill Committee for the Public Order Act last year, and I highlighted, as a former police officer myself who has policed protests, that what is really important is the relationship between the police and the protest organisers, so that they can be facilitated as safely as possible, but so that they can take action where things have overstepped the line.
Right. We've certainly heard from some of the groups organising the protest, they won't be doing anything of the sort in terms of what James Cleverly has said.
Doesn't the emphasis need to be on peaceful? I mean, I think that if on peaceful, So I think if people are protesting peacefully, respectfully and without inflaming tensions, then I think everybody on this panel can support that. I don't think it's in the name of peaceful protest to be surrounding the likes of Wes Streeting's office or indeed Tobias Ellwood's home. I just think that's taking that right of protest far too far. I also was really, really disturbed to see those words projected onto Big Ben. And I think many were looking at that thinking, and I agree with your point, Margaret, about the police, because I think the police have got a really difficult job and it's costing them a hell of a lot of money to do it, while they've clearly got other priorities to cut down on crime in London and beyond. But to see those words projected onto Big Ben when they are so inflammatory and they are so offensive to Jewish people, and to have the police let it happen, I think was quite a sad day.
Hang on, we don't know whether the police let it happen. I mean,
well, it wasn't stopped, Margaret.
Yeah, but they may not have been able to identify the source in time to stop it. I mean, I guess that's what happened. It'd be interesting to know.
But we haven't heard much from the police saying it shouldn't have happened.
It shouldn't have happened. I agree with you entirely. It shouldn't have happened. They're deeply offensive words, and it's very difficult. But that's why I've got to come back to you. I think the words we say as politicians and as leaders, and the words you print in the Daily Telegraph, all that matters in creating an environment in which peaceful demonstrations...
Finally, Miriam, because we've got to move on.
I agree. Of course, politicians need to be careful, but we also need to have freedom of speech.
Agreed.
And when these protests are intimidating MPs into not being able to say what they think...
Speech too?
Well, they are, as long as they're peaceful, as Camilla said. But in Sheffield, for example, soon after the attacks in Israel, we had a roadblock set up by Hamas supporters demanding money from drivers trying to enter the city centre. That's not legitimate. That's not a peaceful protest. But the police didn't do anything, and that's what's the point.
All right, we're going to move, because this may come up at Prime Minister's questions in terms of what James Cleverly has said. Let me show you this headline. BBC News: cash-strapped councils target arts, parks and leisure cuts. Councils in England are under severe financial pressure, with many cutting services right across the board to balance their budgets. Now, none more so than Birmingham City Council. It's the largest authority in Europe, which is facing a council tax rise of 21% over 2 years and £300 million in cuts over the next 2 years. We're going to talk to the leader of the council in a moment. But first, let's hear what residents in Birmingham had to say.
We pay our taxes and it's not our fault that it's gone up, and we feel like we're getting penalised for it. It'll
get better eventually, but it's not good at the moment. Not a nice place to live.
Why should we be penalised for their misdemeanours? So we're getting less service over the years. We don't even get bin bags anymore. Less service, but now we have to pay for the things that they have done.
They're talking about doing the same next year. Where do we get the money from?
Let's welcome Labour leader of Birmingham Council, John Cotton. Hello to you. Yesterday, your cabinet agreed budget cuts of £300 million spread over the next 2 years. The cuts are so severe, it left one of your own councillors in tears. How can you justify it?
We've been faced with incredibly difficult choices in setting this budget. As you say, £300 million in cuts and a 9.99% increase in council tax this year and next. We have got to restore the council's financial stability. That was why I was appointed as leader, and I'm taking forward the steps that we need to address some specific issues here in Birmingham. But it's also really clear from the LGRU report that's been published today, and indeed just up and down the land now, councils are facing a significant financial crisis because we've been hammered bluntly for the last 14 years at losing funding.
But you yourself just referred to unique situation in Birmingham, which we'll come on to. And you also talked about choices. Have you made the right choices, John? Bin collections moving to fortnightly from 2025, 11 community centres being sold off, road maintenance being reactive only, all community and arts funding scrapped, home school transport being reviewed, and many, many more. How's the city going to recover from this?
Well, I think those choices illustrate the difficult decisions that we're having to take in this budget. However, what we have sought to do in a very, very tight financial situation is continue to protect adult social care and children's services, and we're actually seeking to take the majority of the cuts from back office. I think it's really important that we do that. However, these are decisions, as I say, that councils up and down the land are now having to face because of that serious underfunding. And it's really important to bear in mind that the consequence of that in Birmingham over the last decade decade has been we've lost £1 billion. So clearly we're in a really, really difficult position now in seeking to restore the council's financial stability.
But do you also want to apologise for the mismanagement when it came to legacy equal pay claims that have also resulted in Birmingham being bankrupt?
I've been really clear that we take responsibility for those specific issues that we need to address here in Birmingham. And as the new leader of the council, that's exactly what I'm doing together with my cabinet team. So we will take responsibility for those issues here in Birmingham. But what I am saying is that government also needs to take some responsibility here for a crisis that's now raging up and down the land. Councils of all political stripes and of all shapes and sizes are in a very difficult position, as the news reports today are showing.
Well, John, do stay with us. I mean, Miriam, he's right, isn't he, the leader of the council, in terms of affecting councils and local authorities of all stripes. The government has just cut away at local government funding, and this is what the people of Birmingham have got to face.
Well, as you said, there are specific issues in Birmingham.
Yeah, but putting that aside, and he's accepted that.
But I think it's important to understand that the cost of this equal pay payout is nearly £2 billion, so it's quite a lot of money. But exactly, leaving that aside, many, many councils, particularly urban ones in deprived areas, are facing huge pressures on their budget. Yeah. Yes, I do think the cuts to local authority spending in the 2010 government were unjustified and in retrospect wrong. Oh. But actually, we look at it now, the spending per head it is very constant over the last few years, and the government is funding more from next year. And I think what we need to look at is what is driving the pressure on budgets. That is adult social care, which is a direct result of an ageing population. That's not going to go away. And huge increases in children's social care, actually, partly to do with a reduction in the number of local authority maintained places for children in care and paying private companies to do that, but also more children with special needs that need to go to special schools. And I think we need an almost non-politicised debate about the drivers of these factors, which are demographic at the end of the day, and what we're going to do about it, and not just trade blows on who's providing what. There's only one type of taxpayer, that's you and me. It doesn't matter whether it comes from council tax or national government tax. We need to get more.
It does depend, though, what's expected from councils, and maybe there has to be a conversation about not just the statutory, as you say, services that councils provide, but everything else around it, and what taxpayers, as you say, are expecting from their local authorities. Miriam mentioned cuts since 2010. That was the coalition government, the age of austerity, as it became known. Do you regret that the Liberal Democrats were party to the sort of swingeing cuts? I think 37% from 2010 to 2015.
There's absolutely no doubt that the situation that the coalition government was faced with in 2010 meant there was a number of decisions which, in hindsight, should be revisited. But there's absolutely no doubt that since 2015 we have seen more of the same. And I think Miriam's right from some extent that we do need to have a depoliticised discussion about this. In Scotland, we're having similar issues where the Scottish Government has passed a very damaging budget this week, which COSLA, the Association of Local Councils in Scotland, who's chaired by an SNP councillor, has also said is devastating for local authorities. So we do need to depoliticise it. But what I would say is we're looking forward to the budget next week, and all that is being talked about is the headroom that the Chancellor might have to deliver tax cuts. I think what's quite clear from what you saw from the people in Birmingham is they want to pay for services and they want to receive services.
I mean, would a Labour government restore some of the cuts to local government over the years? Because people are paying more and getting less.
Completely ridiculous, and the cuts have been enormous. I actually agree with a lot of what Miriam said. I think the cuts, it's a 40% across the board over 10 years of central government grant. And I know my own local authority, actually since 2015, Miriam, they have lost a third of their money. We're going to live within our fiscal rules, but let me move
Which means there won't be any more money. There
we're
won't
going
be
to
a
live within our...
settlement.
But can I just talk about the unfairness of the system? And that might take... We tried to... I'm so old now. We tried to, when there was a Labour government, we did try and do a little bit of a reform on council tax. We tried to introduce some upper bands because it's so unfair at the moment. If you live in Hartlepool, you're paying, and your property is worth less, you're paying more in council tax than if you live in Kensington, where your property is probably 20 times more in value, and you're still paying less because of the banding. So if we could do the banding, and then the other thing to say is, I'd absolutely love to see cross-party consensus on this. There will inevitably be winners and losers if there's any reform of the council tax. And I can't see, with the best will in the world, that either Conservative Party or the Liberal Democrat will give up that political chance to build a sensible system and allow consensus to emerge.
I'm not particularly arguing for a reform of council tax, although that may be necessary. I'm more talking about how we need to address these national systemic problems in our economy that stem from an ageing population, a birth rate too low, people being too sick to work, and also a huge imbalance of trade, which is mean we're getting more and more into debt. And councils do need more money, but if that's going to come from the taxpayer, which is an unfair burden on particularly young people and people with families, we've got to have a serious debate about whether that's even possible.
Do you want to have that debate? Do councils do too much, or try and do too much?
Well, there's long been an argument about, you know, adult social care and whether it should be administrated by councils or by central government. And then you have the whole argument about you getting looked after if you've got cancer, but not if you've got dementia, which is a problem. I would make the point, though, if all councils are facing these historically difficult times and some of them aren't going bust, we still do have to ask questions about the leadership of some of these councils. Some of the leadership has been bad. I mean, I think two predecessors before the chap you have on now was appointed. He was a university lecturer. He didn't have any experience of running anything, and then he was put in charge of the council, and catastrophic errors were made.
Well, let's put that back to John Cotton. Do you agree it's down to leadership? Not every council is facing the sort of choices, as you put it, that Birmingham is.
Leadership's always important. As I say, that's why I've come in as the new leader, taking responsibility for these issues and dealing with those Birmingham-specific problems. But listening to the discussion on the panel, you can't escape the wider issues that are now affecting local government up and down this country in terms of the impact of a decade or more of cuts, and also issues around social care. I mean, I was listening with great interest to the comments around the pressures in adult social care. I seem to remember one of the many Conservative Prime Ministers that we've had over the last few years said that he'd got a plan to fix adult social care. Yet, if you talk to any council up and down this country, they'll tell you adult social care remains resolutely unfixed. And I think this shows that we need a proper grown-up discussion around how we properly resource local government and also how funding is allocated fairly. Cities like Birmingham have big challenges, and we need the resources to be able to address those.
And I think the tragedy is that you're being forced, John, now to go down to absolutely minimum statutory duties, and you're losing so much that has an impact on the quality of life for your citizens. So if I look at, you know, closure of libraries, you're withdrawing all the funding from the arts, for example. Your youth clubs, hugely important in trying to deal with things like knife crime, to have young kids with somewhere to go and something to do, all of which is non-statutory, all of which is going in your authority and across the country. And that is a terrible legacy, I'm afraid, that we're going to have to inherit and try and work our way through and develop
it's also his legacy, Margaret. Sorry, the running of this council has been appalling for many years. So it's not just a kind of central government legacy of cuts, is it? It's also a case of grotesque mismanagement. The management of the equal pay claim was absolutely disastrous and cost far more money than it needed to. I'm not quite sure, you know, this is a shared problem, surely. Labour have been running this council badly for years.
Yeah, but to be fair, there are both Labour and Conservative councils that are now in trouble. And if I can make a comment, John won't agree with this, but when I was a minister and I sort of had some responsibility for children's services and education, Birmingham is a huge... I always think Birmingham's too big. It's really, really difficult to run Birmingham.
Should be broken up,
and it could, and I think if it were broken up, it might be easier to run, because that's been one of the...
Well, let's ask John. What do you think? Should it be broken up, John?
No, I wouldn't share that view. I think it's really there's a power that comes from Birmingham as a very cohesive and united city that's important that we don't lose that.
Right.
And also, I think if you were to look at what the implications would be just in terms of tax base, East Birmingham, which is a part of the city I'm very proud to represent, one of the poorest parts of the city and indeed the country, would have an absolutely minimal tax base, and you wouldn't be able to address some of those big challenges. So there is a strength that comes from Birmingham's size and unanimity as well.
Are you disappointed to hear, not just from Margaret, but the Labour Party as a whole, that if they do win the next election, you're unlikely to get any more money in terms of any funding settlement?
I don't underestimate the challenges that will face an incoming Labour government, given the gross mismanagement that we've seen of the economy by the present administration. They will have some difficult choices to take, just as we're having to take difficult choices in Birmingham at the moment. But what I do know is that there will be a positive and constructive partnership between a Labour-led council and a Labour government that will be able to start addressing some of these systemic challenges that we're seeing.
But you'll have ripped the heart out of Birmingham by then, won't you? I mean, how will the city come back from these cuts?
So this is still a city that in many respects is on the up. We've got record levels of investment coming in, we've got businesses setting up, we've got jobs growth. The real challenge here is ensuring that every part of the city is able to share in that, and how we work more in partnership with others to meet some of the challenges as we're having to take some of these very difficult spending decisions. But there is an absolute citywide commitment to ensuring that we deliver a brighter and better future for the people of this city, hopefully with a government that's prepared to work with local government rather than against it.
Right. Thank you very much. John Cotton there, Labour leader of Birmingham Council. Let's listen to something our guest here, Miriam Cates, raised at Prime Minister's Questions last week.
The United Kingdom has a strong tradition of legislating to protect children from serious threats to their safety and welfare. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's time to consider banning social media and perhaps even smartphones for under-16s?
Miriam, why shouldn't under-16s have smartphones? And this was a question you raised last month, I should say, not last week.
It was last month. Well, I think it's becoming increasingly clear that smartphones and social media particularly are having a really detrimental impact on children under 16s, whether that's whether you look at the suicide statistics, which are horrendous, are tripling in young girls killing themselves since 2010, poor mental health, pornography addiction, all sorts of dreadful harms. Whatever measure you use of child well-being, it's going down across the Western world, not just in this country, particularly in English-speaking countries. I think it's increasingly difficult to argue that this isn't as a result of screens, of having the internet in your pocket, constant ability to look at harmful material on phones. And so I think we've got to the point now where we can't ignore this problem anymore, and we need to do something about it. I think, of course, the tech companies need to play their part. They are some of the biggest, richest companies in the whole world, but it's not enough. I don't think social media is safe for children.
I mean, could it ever happen, though? Is the genie out of the bottle? Could you ever get to a stage, rightly or wrongly, and we'll talk about the reaction that you've had, but could you ever do it practically?
No, I think Miriam's analysis is right. I think her prescription, I have to tell you, is for the birds. You can't, you know, smartphones are there, they're a new consumer product that everybody has the right to access. And for kids, if you just think about it, it's a way they keep in touch with their family, it's a way they keep in touch with their friends, it's access to information. And actually for some groups, if I take, for example, people who've got diabetes, you know, you can now use your smartphone as a way of telling you whether or not your sugar levels are right. So, you know, we want them, and I think there are two things I would say would be my answer to the problem that you've quite rightly analysed. One is you have got to get those platforms to behave themselves. You've got to get the platforms to put in to not show harmful stuff.
But their business model.
Let me just finish the argument. You've got to and they've got to play. They've got to revise the algorithms the children can't access. And then the other thing I would say, and this is more sort of a partisan issue, but it's not really partisan, but the cut in children's mental health services has been horrific.
This argument is thrown around by the left, and I don't deny that there have been cuts to these services, but it's a completely inadequate argument because this has happened across the Western world, in countries with governments of all different colours, with all different attitudes.
Miriam, if after COVID there had been that proper investment in supporting children...
I completely disagree, because...
Let me finish the argument. If after COVID there'd been proper investment in providing the services to help kids, and I've got grandchildren who you can watch them.
COVID exacerbated this problem.
If there'd been proper investment in supporting them to deal with a life after...
All right.
If you see hardcore pornography when you're 11... because people are sending it to you.
That's not your fault. You're a consumer. You need a safe product.
But it's not safe. The business model of these massive...
Well, hang on.
I think the point here is that, and I think most parents know this and they see it, that the technology raced ahead and the children had these phones in their hands, but the actual content wasn't properly regulated. And so we're all having to catch up with that. Well, you know, the interesting thing here from children's perspectives, I did this smartphone challenge with my 3 children who are 15 and 13. My 10-year-old doesn't have a phone, but she does have access to a tablet. And basically, we swapped their smartphones for brick phones like we used to have in the early days.
Those great
Nokia.
big things.
Yep, they couldn't do any social media or anything. At the end of the week, they said that they had enjoyed their week because they didn't have this technology.
Well, I mean,
you ask children, would you like to have been brought up when I was in the 80s where I didn't have smartphones? And invariably they'll say yes. As a result of that, my daughter came off TikTok. It isn't just the pernicious nature of some of the content, which I agree with you, Miriam.
Well,
you know,
but Margaret,
encourages people.
You can. But interestingly, the public. I mean, let's just take this. 2/3 of Britons, it says in the Sunday Times.
Are we going to suddenly going to criminalise parents and children under 16?
Could I come in on this? Because I have done a lot of...
Well, hang on. Let me just show you this headline in the Sunday Telegraph. 2/3 of Britons want ban on smartphones for under 16s. Now, how it would work, of course, survey results hailed as tipping point when public recognises devices have transformed childhood for the worse. Where are you?
Yeah, I think I'm with Margaret from the perspective of, you know, if I think I've got a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, so we've been navigating this for a number of years. And I remember when they were small, there was a number of the children's toy producers who were producing their own kind of laptops and phones. And frankly, you know, consumers didn't want them because they wanted the tablet and smartphone access. So I think it is about education, and that's not education of just education of young people. That's education of parents. And actually, this is where we can use emerging technology. In that, you know, there are a number of apps now where an adult can have an app on their phone, the child can as well, that's looking out for danger words and can have those conversations. You know, part of that is in terms of being a parent, is remembering that's not about being your child's friend, it's about being their parent. And when I think about conversations I've had with my teenage son about Andrew Tate and, you know, for example, what he thinks of him and what conversations and understanding that we've then had as a result, what I do think we need to look at is the NSPCC is calling specifically for a children's social media advocate. That sounds like a no-brainer to me.
Right, I mean, parents feel powerless though, don't they?
We feel powerless because you can put filters on and all the rest of it, and you can put screen time on, and invariably they get old enough to circumnavigate it because they're better at the technology than we are. And on your point, Wendy, I totally agree.
Camilla.
I should be the tech giant, should be doing more, Margaret.
Yes,
I mean, they're making billions.
You can. I will let you back in.
Just one very quick point. I'm not just concerned about harmful content. I'm concerned about what it's actually doing to our youngsters' brains. You know, the dopamine hit from going on Instagram Reels, for instance, where it's never ending, where you keep on getting this little endorphin rush, comparatively makes things like sitting down and reading a book feel really difficult. I don't think it's surprising that there's... I do too, and we all get sucked into this. But it's not surprising that this may have correlated to a rise in diagnoses of ADHD and ADD.
OK, but you've set out how damaging and harmful it is. But is it still achievable?
Can I just say, 2017, the Conservative government legislated for age bans in relation to social media, and it repealed it in the online safety bill last year because actually it's far too difficult.
Yes, but it's replaced it with serious criminal liability for tech firms that allow under 13s on their platforms. But it isn't going to work.
Tech firms' liability.
This is a
huge child protection scandal, and we are going to look back in future generations and say, how did we allow this to our children? Just one stat: for the first time last year, the number of self-generated sexual abuse images of 7 to 10s reached over 50%. 7-year-olds are filming their own sexual abuse on their smartphone for groomers watching it live online. This is the power of the smartphone that's in our children's hand.
But are you throwing the baby out with the bathwater here? And also, how would you do it, Miriam?
Well, so first of all, you would amend the Online Safety Act to raise the age from 13 to 16. That would be the number one thing you do. We've got to crack down on these tech companies. But I do think we should look at limiting or banning the use of smartphones for under 16s. Yes, brick phones should be allowed, maybe an adapted phone that allows GPS and things like that. But Camilla's absolutely right. The average child receives 237 notifications a day. That's a dopamine hit every 4 minutes. It's totally addictive. We agree that driving isn't safe for children, sex isn't safe for children, alcohol isn't safe for children. These things aren't safe for children.
But what about the benefits that Margaret has outlined? I mean, the only thing I would say...
There aren't any.
What, there aren't any at all?
There are no proven benefits of being able to use social media and a smartphone. This is a problem that's only 10 years old. We survived our childhoods brilliantly without a smartphone.
Miriam, I just can't believe what you're saying, because if you think I use my smartphone, coming onto the programme today, there are some subjects which I don't know a lot about. I used it to interrogate and to gather data and information. It's an incredibly powerful change in technology. What you've got to do is regulate to make it safe. When we brought in fan heaters or, you know, oil heaters, all that sort of stuff, they were dangerous. You put in regulation to make it safe for children.
Would you have given your children smartphones under 13?
No, I'm into grandchildren now.
Yeah.
Okay, so all my grandchildren got them at 11 when they go into secondary school. And I think the idea that you know, either you're going to punish parents, penalise parents.
But then would you support a ban of under 11s having a smartphone?
Well,
because that
I think that's a choice. Ironically, it's very odd here because I'm being more liberal than the nanny state Conservatives. I would leave. I personally wouldn't. I think it should be a choice, but I don't think that takes away from the duty of us to regulate those platforms so that they don't put on content and they don't run these algorithms.
And the reality is social media, so many social media platforms and apps already have age limits and they're circumvented. So, you know, in terms of how you would do it, I just find it very difficult to think about you do while acknowledging the harms that
all right, very briefly.
It is possible. YouTube kicked many thousands of under 13s off their platform. They did the right thing. It is possible. But the point is, parents. But the point is, nobody's saying children can't use computers. No one's saying they can't learn to use the internet safely. It's the addiction of it being in the pocket that is the problem.
All right, let's talk about this headline in BBC News. Thousands of protesting farmers travel to Cardiff. Welsh farmers are protesting today against new agricultural proposals by the Welsh Government. The Sustainable Farming Scheme, it's called, is the funding plan for farming post-Brexit, which contains a big emphasis on the environment. In order to gain access to the scheme, farmers will have to commit to having trees on 10% of their land and earmark another 10% as wildlife habitat. The First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, has come in for some criticism. Let's have a listen to him responding in First Minister's questions last week.
Let me begin by recognising that when change happens, people find that challenging. And in rural Wales, there are many changes that are inevitably on their doorstep. They're there because we left the European Union with the security and certainty that gave to farming here in Wales.
Mark Drakeford there. Well, we can speak to the President of the National Farmers Union, Cymru, Aled Jones, who joins us from Cardiff. I'll get you to respond to what we just heard from Mark Drakeford in a moment, but tell us why you're protesting.
Well, it's been an accumulation of several things that have been happening for many years, probably. Regulations have been imposed on farming left, right and centre, and they're building up. And some of the frustrations have probably been brewing since, you know, and leading up to the protest here today. Several things on TV policy. It's been running for 20 years or so. Farmers have been finding it very difficult to cope with the regulations on TV, having between 10 and 12,000 cattle slaughtered every year. And that's causing a huge distress for those people who are caught up in this disease.
Right.
We've had water quality regulations placed upon us as well, which has caused a huge distress. And now we're in the consultation on the Sustainable Farming Scheme. You know, it's all changed, but yeah, farmers have always been having to respond to change, and it's no problem to us.
Right. I mean, too much regulation is what you're saying across the board over a number of years. But do you have a problem with more of an emphasis on playing a part in protecting the environment and tackling climate change?
Well, no, not at all, because, you know, we've been part of that process for many years. We've demonstrated very clearly farmers throughout Wales have been involved in environmental schemes for some of them for 25 years. So that's not the case at all, you know. And what we're trying to say is, right, there has to be a balanced approach, protecting the environment as well as trying to maintain the livelihoods of farmers throughout Wales. And also, I think this is the message that's been resonating, you know, the general public can understand, you know, the crucial role of farmers in delivering safe and affordable food. And if we have, you know, an unbalanced emphasis where the environment takes precedence over food production, it won't succeed.
All right.
And we've said very clearly, you know, these have to run together, a twin track approach where this will almost, you know, it leads to the success eventually. But at the moment, that balance is not there.
Ali, what did you make of Mark Drakeford saying it's as a direct result of Brexit, which a majority of voters in Wales supported? He's taken back control, Mark Drakeford, and this is this is the outcome, I suppose. This is what he thinks is right for farming.
Yeah, OK then. So This is as a result of Brexit. Obviously, we have to design our own policies here in Wales.
Yeah.
And this is the opportunity, really, to have a policy which is conceived, born and bred here in Wales. Yes, OK, no problem at all. But blaming it on Brexit is not the right approach. Let's be proactive. Let's be ambitious for farming throughout Wales. Let's be ambitious for the economy as well. 233,000 people, believe it or not, rely on food and drink coming from agriculture for employment here in Wales. It's the largest single employer. And that message is clear. And, I'm humbled, really, by the support of the Welsh public have given us. And we should always protect that support. And fair play, there's a lot of general public here today supporting the message of farmers.
All right, Aled Jones, thank you very much for joining us. Brexit was about taking back control. That was one of the slogans, Miriam. There were pretty substantial subsidies to farmers from the EU. They have continued for a certain amount of time. Isn't Mark Drakeford just doing exactly what Brexit said it should do?
Well, I think that the policy of Mark Drakeford and the Welsh Government, which I think is to compel farmers to use 10% of their land for trees, is clearly not right. I mean, it seems crazy.
You don't agree with it, but
no, I don't agree with it.
He's doing what Brexit said, which is make a decision in Wales.
Taking back control of our subsidies is absolutely right, and how we distribute them. Farming is always going to need subsidies. We need farmers to look after the land. We're never going to produce all our own food. Food prices are historically low, therefore farmers don't get paid enough. I absolutely agree we need subsidies. But the way those subsidies are distributed and the kinds of activities that they're distributed for has to be right. This is clearly completely wrong.
Why?
Why? Because it's going to result in huge job losses. I think 5,000 jobs.
Global warming?
Well, global warming, of course, is important, but so is farmers having enough income to look after the land. And it's unclear to me how planting 10% of farmland with trees is going to have a massive impact on global warming.
Mark Drakeford worried about the number of trees in the British Isles. I mean, when we talk about taking back control, the agency was meant to go to the farmers. Can't quite understand this from Labour, because Labour want to give the agencies to doctors and nurses when it comes to the running of the NHS, and the agencies to teachers and teaching assistants when it comes to the running of the education system, but not give the agency to farmers when it comes to the running of farming in this country. Of course, the emphasis should be on food production. What is this 10% target? I mean, is Drakeford serious?
Well,
he thinks we've got a problem with the number of trees in the British Isles.
Well, this is the decision he's made. Defend it.
I don't know if our friend is still with us.
I think Aled can hear us.
Can hear. I mean, I think the position of farmers is hugely, hugely worrying. We've seen 6,000 farms go bust. We've seen a third of the workforce go. We see the highest suicide rate in this profession than anywhere. So I've got huge sympathy with trying to support that. And there is a tension between wanting to achieve net zero and protecting food production. There's a tension there. To be absolutely honest with you, I've no idea whether 10% of trees is right or wrong. I'm not an expert in this. And what I'm pleased that he's doing, which is the right thing, is to talk to the farmers locally to see what, where you can get the right balance between the two. But you can't run away from the fact that their contribution to the challenge of global warming is also important. Right, so you've got to work a way through it.
Just before I come to you, Wendy, Aled, did you want to come in? I mean, is the government talking to you about these proposals?
Let's be clear. We were the first organisation to set a net zero ambition in 2019, believe it or not. And we said very clearly we could achieve net zero without eroding food production capacity. It was a suite of measures. Government would have to work with us in policies that would enable us to deliver on this. And we've been very ambitious right from the beginning. We were ambitious before the Welsh Government were ambitious about it as well. So let's give us a little bit of respect, because we've always been proactive in this approach all the while. And the central principle within our ambition that we would not allow our food production capacity to be eroded. And that's a very strong message, when you consider there's a growing population as well.
All right. Well, Aled, Wendy, what do you think, first of all, of the proposals themselves, and then the point that Mark Drakeford uses Brexit as the sort of either justification for taking a different approach?
Well, as Aled knows, obviously the protests are taking place because the consultation is ongoing, and obviously I would very much hope that the Welsh Government was listening after that consultation closed. And I think the irony here is what we've heard from Aled. and from Mark Drakeford is that actually they all want a number of the same things, but it seems to be the implementation of the SFS that is causing the issue. The Welsh Government's own impact assessment estimates that it will result in 11% in job cuts, and that's obviously devastating for a really vital sector. Yeah. And on the Brexit front, I think the challenge here is that it's not just about necessarily Brexit in terms of the subsidies that come in.
We'll come to you, Alan, in just a second.
It is the fact that we know that there have been a number of trade deals that have sort of taken place and they have not delivered what farmers and other industries were expecting. From a UK government perspective, and this is true for farmers in my constituency up in Fife, is that we are still having ongoing issues in relation to seasonal agricultural workers visas, where the government continues to only extend the scheme on an annual basis, which doesn't allow for farmers to long-term plan for the future. And that's where the sustainability environmental measures also come into play.
Right. I mean, Alan, are you confident there might be a change in the approach?
Yeah, well, there are signs of a change, and we had a statement from the Minister yesterday afternoon, which is positive, to be perfectly honest. We have a sensible approach. And as I said earlier, achieving net zero cannot be achieved without losing jobs as well. And that's a fundamental message. The potential of losing 5,500 jobs in Welsh farming, probably more than that in the supply chain as well. That's not a very good message, is it?
Right.
And we can achieve net zero without losing a single person.
Yeah, but it's equally, net zero matters to you and your productivity, as I understand it, because of growing temperatures. Cattle are producing less milk, a litre of less milk per cattle per each day. Now that is an impact of net zero. So you've got a really difficult balance of priorities and policies that you've got to come together. And I think the only way we're going to do it, and I'm glad that the Welsh Agricultural Minister, I think, said she is listening, but is by talking through you and trying to find a compromise between, the short-term interests and the long-term sustainability of our planet.
Alan Jones, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us from the protest. Let's go into the House of Commons chamber because Prime Minister's Questions is going to begin in around 5 minutes' time, and it is filling up as you would expect. Of course, it's a week since the scenes of recrimination and chaos in the Commons last Wednesday, with the Speaker returning to his chair during the debate that was calling for a ceasefire in Gaza to apologise to the SNP because their motion in their Opposition Day debate was not actually selected in the end. Now, since then, 88, I think, the last time I looked, was the number of MPs who've signed an early day motion saying that they no longer have confidence in the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle. One of them is you, Miriam. Why?
Well, I like Sir Lindsay enormously. I think he's been a brilliant speaker and he's personally got a lot of respect across the House. But I think this is more than just about him as a person. I think the office of the Speaker was severely compromised last week. He tore up procedure because of, and I have no reason to doubt his assertion that he was worried about MP security. Well, but the point is, threats from outside, external intimidation, caused our parliamentary procedure to be compromised. And actually, an independent chair and following of parliamentary rules is foundational to our democracy.
Was he not independent?
Well, clearly he wasn't independent because he tore up the rules. Now, whether you say that's to the Labour Party's advantage or because he personally wants to protect MPs, I don't want to have an argument about that. But the point is, the independence of the chair was compromised as a result of external pressure. That cannot happen in a democracy like ours.
As you know, it was claims, allegations of pressure being brought to bear by Sir Keir Starmer, rejected by the Labour leader and others on Lindsay Hoyle, that meant he did break with convention.
Well, let me just say one thing about both Lindsay Hoyle and Keir Starmer, that they are the last people in the world who would try and play a political game on this. I think it goes actually beyond the protection of MPs, which I think is hugely important. I think this was really about, and I was, part of that. If you're dealing with a really contentious issue, which is also very, we're very divided on it. I think it's important that we're able to have a debate which has real options that you can or cannot support. I couldn't have supported either of those options that were before us, either the SNP option or indeed the government option. No, well, you don't, because you've got a view. I've got a view. And I think what he was, these aren't standing orders, these are conventions. And where the conventions don't really meet the needs of the debate, I think it's appropriate to give you something else.
Can he continue?
Oh, yeah,
Lindsay Hoyle,
100%.
when a significant number of MPs, two entire parties, admittedly, smaller parties, SNP, not that small, and Plaid Cymru.
Well,
and, of course, a number of Tories.
I didn't vote for Lindsay Hoyle, if I can say so. I didn't at the time. I voted for a woman. And but I think he has been an excellent, and very, you know, he's been a great chair to all members of Parliament. He's never distinguished. I think he should and can and will.
Do you think he should? I mean, the Liberal Democrats haven't signed the CDM.
In terms of, just for clarity, it wasn't that the SNP motion didn't get selected. It was that because the Labour amendment came first, it would basically knock the SNP motion out.
Yes,
and I know that's
it's a little bit about procedure, but anyway.
I know it's very complicated. But, you know, I think it's quite clear that the Speaker made the wrong decision last week, and he made it for you know, you take him at his word that he made it,
and he came back and apologised
for noble reasons.
Oh,
and,
I'm so sorry. We're going to have to interrupt. I lost track of the time. It's Prime Minister's question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number one, if you please.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I know the thoughts of the whole House will be with the friends and family of Lord Cormac and Ronnie Campbell. They were dedicated parliamentarians. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Giles Walkling. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his answer. Now, I'm certain that everyone in this chamber will agree, whatever their political standpoint, that we should be able to think, speak and vote without fear or favour. But today I need to ask about the painful subject of dental care in Clacton, which is in crisis. Our ICS has found the money and a private firm has found the students to massively increase dental appointments in my patch. However, paper pushers in the NHS England keep citing spurious reasons to prevent this groundbreaking initiative being deployed. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this is scandalous and should be dealt with, and those people blocking it held to account?
Prime Minister. Well, our dentistry recovery plan will make dental services faster, simpler and fairer for patients, including in Clacton, and will fund around 2.5 million more appointments. On the matter the honourable friend raises, as he'll know, this is a local matter, so the Integrated Care Board will determine if they wish to support the pilot proposal in Clacton. But I know that the Minister for Public Health has written to my honourable friend about the proposal, and I hope her letter addresses his concerns.
We come to lead the opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the Prime Minister in his remarks about Lord Cormac and Ronnie Campbell? A Tory MP spent last week claiming that Britain is run by a shadowy cabal made up of activists, the deep state, and most chillingly of all, the Financial Times. At what point did his party give up on governing and become the political wing of the Flat Earth Society?
Mr. Speaker, another week where the honourable member is just sniping from the sidelines because he has absolutely nothing that he can say what we do. What we're getting on with, Mr. Speaker, is delivering on the people's priorities. The number of small boats down by a third, Mr. Speaker. NHS performance, improving, inflation continuing to fall. And Mr. Speaker, not only that, we're delivering a significant tax cut for millions of working Britons, while his incoherent energy plans would put taxes up for everyone across the country.
Mr. Speaker, his predecessor spent last week in America trying to flog her new book. In search of fame and wealth, she's taken to slagging off and they made her Prime Minister, now they can't bear talking about her. In search of fame and wealth, she's taken to slagging off and undermining Britain at every opportunity. She claimed that as Prime Minister she was sabotaged by the deep state. She also remained silent as Tommy Robinson, that right-wing thug, was described as a hero. Why is he allowing her to stand as a Tory MP at the next election?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe a single member of this House supports Tommy Robinson, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, if he wants to talk about former leaders and predecessors, the whole country knows his record, because he sat there while anti-Semitism ran rife in this party, and not once but twice backed a man who called Hamas friends, Mr. Speaker. But to their credit, the Shadow Chancellor, the Shadow Home Secretary, and indeed the Shadow Foreign Secretary refused to back the former Labour leader. But he didn't, because he's spineless, hopeless, and utterly shameless.
Mr. Speaker, I've changed my party for the better. He is being changed by his party. The reason he's letting her stand is because he's too weak to do anything about it. It's the story of his leadership. When they refuse to accept any blame for the ruin of the last 14 years, you do wonder who they think has been running the country all this time. Thankfully, the former Prime Minister's on hand again to help. It turns out it's all the fault of the media, the corporate world, and, bizarrely, the President of the United States. Winston Churchill once said, "The price of greatness is responsibility." Now, I don't think the British public are expecting greatness from this Prime Minister, just a bit of accountability. So doesn't think it would be great if, just for once, the Tories actually took some responsibility.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about leadership, he talks about change, but when I learnt of something that I didn't agree with, I suspended one of my MPs straight away. But Mr. Speaker, when he learned of vile anti-Semitic remarks made by a Labour candidate, what did he do, Mr. Speaker? He instructed his team to defend him. He sent a shadow cabinet minister to campaign for him, and he personally backed him for days. And that's the difference between us. I act on my principles. He hasn't got any.
I can't believe he's saying it with a straight face. The former Prime Minister continued on her American odyssey. This journey into the wild west of her mind. She also claimed, Mr. Speaker, that Nigel Farage is the man to restore the Tory party. Can the Prime Minister confirm whether he too would welcome Mr. Farage back into the Tory fold?
Mr. Speaker, in our party, we have a proud tradition of diversity and accepting everyone from every background. Indeed, it is a proud record that puts Labour to shame, Mr. Speaker. This is the party that delivered the first Jewish Prime Minister, the first female Prime Minister, the first black Chancellor, the first Muslim Home Secretary, and now led by the first British Asian Prime Minister. While it seems he can only champion men from North London, it's the Conservatives that represent modern Britain, Mr. Speaker.
So this diverse Tory party does welcome Nigel Farage. The Prime Minister 2 months ago, the Prime Minister said the Tory party is a broad church. I welcome lots of people who want to subscribe to our ideals and our values. This is the same Nigel Farage who said he agreed with the basic premise of Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech and bemoaned the influence of the Jewish lobby. So is the Prime Minister simply too scared to stand up to the gaggle of Tory MPs who moonlight as GB presenters, or does he genuinely think Nigel Farage shares the ideals and values of the Tory party?
Mr. Speaker, he wants to talk about values, but tomorrow in Rochdale, the people will have a choice of 3 former Labour candidates, 2 of which are anti-Semites, Mr. Speaker. The truth is, his party is so mired in hate that despite 3 ex-Labour candidates standing, he can't back a single one of them, Mr. Speaker. It's because we expel anti-Semites, he makes them Labour candidates.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is these are no longer the Tories your parents voted for, and the public can see it. the Prime Minister has lost control of his party to the hordes of records of malcontents, the tinfoil hat brigade over there, the extremists who wreck the economy, all lining up to undermine him, humiliate him, and eventually to get rid of him. When will he ever stand up to them and end the pathetic spectacle of a Tory party that used to try and beat Nigel Farage, now giving up and dancing to his tune instead?
Mr. Speaker, utterly shameless from someone who stood by while anti-Semitism ran rife in his party, oversaw the appalling situation in Rochdale and twice backed the member for Islington North. And in the last few homes, Mr. Speaker, last few weeks, we've seen members of Parliament's homes surrounded, their events disrupted, council meetings threatened, and just last week we saw the very rules that govern this place abused because of intimidation, Mr. Speaker. While he might, Mr. Speaker, while he might want to bend to mob rule, we will face down the extremists and stand up for British values.
Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, last Saturday, Russian forces launched their heinous attack on Ukraine. The response of the British government and the British people has been magnificent, and I want to pay my own tribute to all those who have done so much, not least in my own constituency of Bracknell, where Ukrainian people have been so warmly welcomed. Mr. Speaker, we must never bow to tyranny. So could the Prime Minister please assure the House that our support to Ukraine and all of our NATO allies will continue to be unwavering?
Prime Minister. Well, can I join my honourable friend in thanking people up and down the country, including the people of Bracknell, for welcoming Ukrainian families into their homes and communities. During my visit to Ukraine in January, I announced a major new package of support, including £2.5 billion of military assistance. And last week, we announced 50 new sanctions targeting individuals and businesses sustaining Putin's illegal war machine. Our support to Ukraine will never waver.
SNP Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, 30,000 people dead, 70,000 injured, 1.5 million sheltering in Rafah, 300,000 living in what is considered to be feral conditions in northern Gaza, and of course 100 hostages still tragically held by Hamas. It is the horror of those numbers that demands that this House have its say, just as it is the horror of those numbers that show that this House should demand an immediate ceasefire. Now, President Biden has indicated that that ceasefire may take place from Monday. Does the Prime Minister share in his confidence?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have consistently called for an immediate humanitarian pause which would allow for the safe release of hostages, including British nationals, and more aid to reach Gaza. We welcome progress on a deal. As the honourable gentleman said, there has been progress, and we urge everyone on all sides to seize the opportunity. And I've been clear that we must seize the momentum from this terrible tragedy to find a lasting resolution to this conflict, which delivers on the promise of a two-state solution and ensures that Israelis and Palestinians can live in dignity and security.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, we're now approaching 5 months since this conflict first began. And in that time, this House has equivocated, and this government on 3 occasions at the United Nations has abstained when it could have voted for a ceasefire. Abstentionism is not leadership. So can I ask the Prime Minister, should this matter now come before the United Nations, with a ceasefire potentially in sight, will he use his government's vote in order to deliver that ceasefire?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we support the United States draft resolution that was discussed with colleagues at United Nations last week, but just calling for an immediate full ceasefire now, which collapses back into fighting within days or weeks, and indeed does not release hostages, including British hostages, is not in anyone's interest. We must work towards a permanent ceasefire, and that starts with an immediate humanitarian pause to get aid in and hostages out. I agree with the honourable gentleman about the suffering of the people in Gaza, and in this country we should be proud of everything we are doing to help them and provide them the life-saving aid that they deserve.
Dr. Jamie Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure we're all proud of the open government we have, the availability of information and our open data. But with machine learning and AI fast becoming more prevalent, does the Prime Minister not agree that now is the time for us to look at licensing this information where it's going to be used for commercial gain to inform intelligence that's going to disrupt society and our economy? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
Well, can I join with my honourable friend and his passion for AI? And like him, I'm proud of our record at the forefront of the AI revolution, having created one of the world's first AI safety institutes, establishing the State of AI report, and hosting the world's first ever Global AI Safety Summit. Now, I will ensure that my honourable friend meets with the relevant minister to discuss his proposals to ensure that we can harness the opportunities of AI and protect ourselves against the risk that it poses.
Liz Sabble-Roberts.
Plaid Cymru has signed the full facts pledge for an honest general election campaign. One of Full Facts 4 asks is to renounce deceptive campaigning tactics. There is evidence of egregious, misleading campaigning in Wales and elsewhere by the Conservatives in recent weeks. We all have a responsibility to campaign honestly, because the alternative is to be complicit in dismantling democracy. Therefore, will the Prime Minister sign Full Facts pledge for an honest election?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to just be in Wales last week, and these are the facts on the ground. The Labour-run Welsh NHS is performing the worst in the United Kingdom. Small Welsh businesses, including pubs and restaurants, are facing a crippling rise in their business rates. And indeed, Welsh farmers are being decimated by the plans of the Welsh Labour government. Those are the facts in Wales, and we're going to continue to point them out at every opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There are 4,000 patients in Carshalton and Wallington facing uncertainty after landlords pulled out of discussions the day before the GP practice's lease expired and then issued them notice that they were trespassing. Now, the local ICB has issued a very weak statement. The local Lib Dem-run council is refusing to meet the practice and myself. And now we have 4,000 patients unsure if they're going to have a surgery to go to. So can the Prime Minister assure me that when these decisions are taken by landlords, that there is appropriate infrastructure in place to support NHS patients before they are cast out to try and find somewhere else to go?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend will know, GP leases are commercial agreements between landlords and tenants, but he's right. Everything that can be done should be done to ensure that GP surgeries do not have to close. That's why in March last year we commissioned a review into legislation governing these leases, and the review will create a new framework that will make leasing to tenants such as GP surgeries and other groups easier and more accessible. But I know his local residents will want this sorted as soon as possible to take advantage of the extra appointments that we are creating so that people can get access to the primary care that they need.
Alan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, one of the few good things to come out of Wednesday's Stramash last week was that the House united around a call for an immediate ceasefire. Now, I welcome that. That's progress. The Prime Minister was just given an opportunity by my friend to commit the UK's representatives in the United Nations and elsewhere to articulate that position of this House. If they're not going to do that, what would he say to those of us who say this place really is just a sick pantomime?
Mr. Speaker, as I outlined previously, it is not right to call for an immediate ceasefire that would collapse instantly into more fighting and not do anything to get more aid into Gaza to alleviate the suffering that people are experiencing, but also to make sure that we can safely remove hostages, including British hostages. That has been our consistent position. We have been calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, which will provide the conditions for a lasting and sustainable peace. But just calling for something that will collapse back into fighting is not in anyone's interest. But all our diplomatic efforts at the United Nations and elsewhere are targeted towards bringing that about, and I'm pleased that in recent days progress has been made, and we should keep pressure on all parties to come to a resolution.
Philip Dunn.
Does my right honourable friend share my enthusiasm at Monday's announcement of 27 new potential bathing water sites across the country, including 3 in Shropshire, 2 on the River Severn in Ironbridge and Shrewsbury, and 1 on the River Teme at Ludlow? How will these very welcome designations improve the quality of rivers in Shropshire and the other areas under consideration?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, on Monday we launched a consultation on the largest ever rollout of new bathing water sites. 27 potential new bathing waters in England, including an extra one on the River Teme in Ludlow in my right honourable friend's constituency. And he's right, substantial improvements have been made in recent years. Almost 90% of designated bathing waters in England now meet the highest standards of good or excellent, up from just 76% in 2010, Mr. Speaker. All part of our plan for water, which alongside this side of the House, voting for the strictest storm overflow targets and plans for unlimited penalties for polluting water companies, opposed by the party opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The parent of a 2-year-old in the UK is currently spending over £14,000 a year on a full-time nursery place. Last year, the Prime Minister promised these parents that in April 2024 there would be a new free childcare offer. With only a month to go, parents don't know they can access this offer because of staff shortages and because of the lack of childcare spaces. So could I ask the Prime Minister today, will the parents that he promised, will they be able to accept this childcare offer that he talked about last year, or is this another example of a broken Tory promise?
Mr. Speaker, we're delivering on what we said, which is 30 hours of free childcare a week for working parents of children from 9 months until they start school. It is the largest ever expansion of childcare in our country's history. But what I'd say to the Honourable Lady is, perhaps she might want to have a conversation with her Welsh Labour colleagues, who have been given the funding to deliver childcare expansion in Wales, and what have they done? They've pocketed the money instead of matching our plans to support parents in England.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The notorious Uli Treaton Crossroads, just outside of Alton in my constituency, is just one of several major road safety and highway issues that have been ignored for decades by the Labour-controlled Rotherham Council. I will be presenting a petition to this place telling Rotherham Council to end this chaotic mismanagement. But can I ask the Prime Minister's support to urge both the Labour-controlled Council and the Labour Mayor to listen to residents, get this junction sorted, to stop the huge tailbacks, save lives, get Rotherham Valley moving, and end this war against cars in my constituency?
Well, my honourable friend raises an important point, and he's right to champion his constituents in this way, because when Labour run things, they do just run them badly. And he can be assured that we have provided £750,000 of funding to Rotherham Council for safety improvements to local roads, and we're continuing to provide vulnerable friends' constituents with a further £1 billion allocated to his local area in the second round of the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlements. Because of the decision that we made on HS2, communities, towns and cities across the North and Midlands are going to receive billions of pounds of funding for transport projects that will make a difference to him and his constituents far quicker than anything else that was planned.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Another 80 victims of the contaminated blood scandal have died since Sir Brian Langstaff gave his final recommendations on compensation to the government in April 2023, 329 days ago. Will the Prime Minister join families who are lobbying members of Parliament here today to explain why his government has failed to implement any of those recommendations 11 months on.
Mr. Speaker, I'm acutely aware of the strength of feeling on this issue and the suffering of all of those impacted by this dreadful scandal. We've consistently acknowledged that justice should be delivered. I gave evidence to the public inquiry last year. The government has accepted the moral case for compensation, and which is why on Monday, in the other place, we committed to bringing forward amendments at report stage of the Victim and Prisoners Bill with the intention of speeding up the implementation of our response to the infected blood inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister sincerely for the extra £244 million announced this week for transport and investment in Shropshire. This comes on top of £300 million for modernisation of our local A&E services, levelling up funds to modernise Shrewsbury Town Centre, and fully funding the North West Relief Road, the Ring Road round Shrewsbury. These infrastructure projects will have a major benefit, not just for us, but for those who follow us in Shropshire. There is, however, one issue I would like to still raise with the Prime Minister, which is how our local Shropshire Council is funded to deal with adult social care costs. We have a disproportionately ageing population in Shropshire, and Shropshire Council is struggling to meet those additional costs. What more can be done to help councils like Shropshire deal with rising adult social care costs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to my honourable friend for the work he does representing his constituents? He's right about the pressures that are faced, particularly in rural areas, which is why the government provided £600 million of additional funding for local government across the country, ensuring around a 7.5% increase in resources available to invest in social care, but also by an extra addition to the Rural Services Delivery Grant, an acknowledgement of the challenges of providing services in rural areas, with more funding for those rural councils to deliver.
Alison Thewlis.
My constituent Lee Haywood in Dalmarnock is on a communal heat network and has seen both his standing charges and his energy bills absolutely soar. The Heat Network Market Framework was introduced in 2021, but in a letter from his Minister in the Lords last week, he says his ambition is that price regulation will only start in spring 2026. So can I ask, is it his government's incompetence or Ofgem's lack of powers that are letting down constituents who can't afford to put on their heating this winter?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable lady will know, standing charges are a matter for the independent regulator Ofgem, who are currently looking at all of those things as part of a consultation. And more generally, it's this government that's providing considerable support to families across the country, including in Scotland, with their energy bills. And I'm sure she will join me in welcoming the recent announcement about the fall in energy bills, bringing them back to levels that we haven't seen in a long time, on top of the cost of living support that the Chancellor's provided, so that everyone in our country gets the help that they need.
Paul Brister.
Warrington Fields is a much-loved open space, cherished by local residents and used by the nearby school as playing fields. Shockingly, Peterborough City Council proposed to fence off almost the entire area, rejecting a compromise that most residents and the school were happy with. Bizarrely, the local council seeks to blame the Secretary of State for Education, myself, and even the Prime Minister. Will my right honourable friend get behind my campaign to save Warrington Fields and make it clear right here, right now, that this is a matter entirely for the local authority?
Can I pay tribute to my honourable friend for his championing of his constituents on this matter? As he knows, last year the Education Secretary rightly rejected Peterborough City Council's application to remove the playing field land at Ken Stimpson Community School from educational land to public open space, and that decision ensured that children will have access to the open space that they deserve. But I am told by the department that the council can provide for some of that land to be fenced, and the department would be comfortable with that, provided that the overall site remains an educational land. That is something that I know he wants to see, and the department are ready to work with him to make sure that that happens.
Gavan Jones.
After yesterday's revelation that Nick Reed, the CEO of the Post Office is under investigation for an 80-page report written by the former head of HR at the Post Office. Does the Prime Minister and Business Secretary have confidence in Nick Reed's leadership at the Post Office?
Mr. Speaker, it would clearly be inappropriate for me to comment on an investigation before it has been completed. Our focus remains working closely with the Post Office to ensure that it delivers justice for postmasters caught up in this historic scandal, and that's why we will imminently bring forward the legislation that we promised.
Shalish Varma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few years ago, there was a proposal to build nearly 7,000 houses in a beautiful part of my constituency near the villages of Castor and Aylesworth, against the wishes of the local residents. I worked with the local community, and together we were able to stop this development. However, efforts are now being made to include this land in a revised Peterborough local plan. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that it is very important that the voice of the local community is heard, and that it is unacceptable that developments can take place in this circuitous way, especially when there is other more suitable land available in and around the city of Peterborough?
My right honourable friend raises an important issue, and he's right that the local community should always have their voice heard. It's important that councils bring forward local plans, but this must be done in close consultation with local communities because their voices matter. As I understand it, the Peterborough local plan is still under preparation, and there are opportunities to provide comments on the draft plan. So I encourage and commend my honourable friend for continuing to support his local community to make sure that their voice is heard.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister talks about things going backwards. The UK is the only Western G7 power in recession. 7 consecutive quarters of no growth. That is the worst since records began in 1955. So can the Prime Minister tell the businesses going bust, tell the families struggling to pay their bills, and tell those being made homeless why this recession, which has his name written all over it, is a good thing for our country?
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the honourable lady she might want to check some of the facts that she just outlined for the House that aren't quite right. Perhaps she would like to explain to the country why it is that her party is stuck with a completely incoherent energy policy that will saddle working families with £28 billion of higher tax rises and higher energy bills.
Jonathan Gullis.
Mr. Speaker, since 2019, the Prime Minister has had our backs in Stoke-on-Trent, North, Kidsgrove and Tork, with record in funding for our local transport. Over £200 million for Stoke and Staffordshire to repair potholes. Over £30 million to improve our bus network with cheaper fares and new and extended routes. Funding to upgrade both Kidsgrove and Stoke-on-Trent railway stations. Bringing back the Stoke to Leek line. And this week, we've seen Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire see a tenfold increase in transport funding year in, year out. I know the party opposite like to talk down Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk, but isn't it true that this Prime Minister, this Conservative Party, are the only party with a plan to improve our, better connect our communities and fix our broken roads and pavements?
Well, as ever, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for Stoke-on-Trent and Kidsgrove, and he's right. Over the next several years, his area will receive 10 times as much as they currently do to invest in local transport schemes as a result of this government's decision on HS2. But he's also right. After years of being neglected by the party opposite, it's this Conservative government that is levelling up across the country and in Stoke-on-Trent, championed by fantastic MPs like him.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, the advent of the Crombie Firth Green Freeport is most welcome. Mr. Speaker, I wonder what discussions the Prime Minister has had with the Scottish Government, who will be responsible for ensuring that there's a robust roads network associated with the Freeport and that there will be sufficient housing for the influx of workers who we hope will contribute to our dream of the fabrication of offshore renewable structures.
Well, I welcome the honourable gentleman's support for the Freeport, taking advantage of our Brexit opportunities to deliver 2 Freeports in Scotland, well, to attract jobs and investment in the industries of the future. With regard to infrastructure investment, not only do we provide the tax benefits for a free port, there are £25 million of seed funding available to the free port in discussions with the government that can be used on local infrastructure improvements that make sense to develop the opportunities that the free port provides.
Simon Fell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The AUKUS programme is not just a national endeavour designed to keep our nation safe, but also an international partnership that speaks about our ambitious work across the globe to pursue security and contain threats. So can I personally thank the Prime Minister for his engagement with the Team Barrow initiative, bringing together senior civil servants, my council, BAE and myself, to drive this programme forward, making sure we can deliver these boats to time and to budget. That means improving the local area considerably and investing in it too. With that in mind, could I invite the Prime Minister to Barrow to meet not just the fantastic people building the boats of the future, but also to see how this programme is going to uplift Furness for the future?
Prime Minister.
At a time of great instability around the world with the war in Ukraine and the Red Sea, my honourable friend is absolutely right that AUKUS is a game-changing defence and security partnership that will keep us safe and create thousands of jobs, both in the UK, shipyards and supply chain, building on the investment in places like Barrow, Derby and elsewhere. He's a fantastic champion of what this industry means in his area, and the Team Barrow partnership is a crucial component of ensuring AUKUS is a success. That's why the Chancellor provided millions of pounds of funding for a delivery board for Barrow. We recently discussed this at Cabinet, and I look forward to visiting him and his community when my diary allows to see the progress for myself.
Anna McMorgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This last weekend, the Prime Minister posed for photographs with a group that shares extremist conspiracy theories on climate change and campaigns against net zero. Does the Prime Minister share their views?
That's no way to talk about the Welsh farming community, Mr. Speaker.
My integrated care board tell me that only £2 million of the £120 million of capital which they receive annually is for primary care. And that seems an unfairly small amount for our amazing family doctors and practice nurses who are, after all, the front door of the NHS. So can our local GPs have a greater share of this?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his excellent and continued campaigning on health provisions for his constituents. Now, on the specific point that he raises, integrated care boards do have the power to increase their primary care annual capital management budgets as long as they keep within the overall budget. I understand my honourable friend recently met with the Health Minister earlier this week to discuss this further, and I will make sure that his proposals are very carefully considered.
Dame Angela Riedel.
We'll leave Prime Minister's questions there. We will, of course, follow it and bring you any important developments. Let's welcome our guests for this part of Politics Live. For the Government, the Justice Minister, Edward Argar, and for Labour, Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry, and the BBC's Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, is here too. Vicky, the exchanges were pretty heated, actually, between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. The Labour leader focusing his ire on why the Prime Minister wasn't taking action against the former Prime Minister, his predecessor, Liz Truss, saying that the whip should be withdrawn from her after, on a tour in America, she said she was sabotaged by the deep state and stayed silent in an interview when far-right Tommy Robinson, he said, was called a hero. In response, Rishi Sunak said that he backed Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour leader, when Labour was embroiled in accusations of allowing anti-Semitism to flourish. It seemed like a competition for whose predecessor was worse. Was it very edifying?
Yeah, and I think that probably is the problem here for Sir Keir Starmer. He could obviously see that there were some things he wanted to go on the attack over, but if you start talking about your predecessors as leaders, he must have realised that the inevitable comeback from the Conservative leader was going to be about Jeremy Corbyn. And then after the week we've had, I suppose not surprising, it slightly became an issue of them saying, well, you know, I'm better at rooting out racism in my party than you are. So in that sense, it did feel pretty unedifying. And I'm not sure quite where the Labour leader thought he was going to go with it. And I think it is, you know, we're a week from the budget. We are a few weeks from May local elections. We're a few months from a general election. And no policy questions there at all. So, I think in terms of the choice of subject, I think people will maybe raise their eyebrows, but obviously Sir Keir Starmer feels that the Conservative Party has a lot to answer, not just on the issue of Liz Truss, but on the other things that have been going on too in Rochdale. But again, he's got his own problems there. So, it was an interesting one, but maybe people watching might wonder where the policy questions
Well, I suppose the point Keir Starmer was trying to make is that your party has been captured by extremists as well as Islamophobes. So he talked about Liz Truss, saying that the Tories have become the political wing of the Flat Earth Society. There has been obviously endless criticism about the former deputy chairman, who has had the whip suspended but has refused to apologise for comments that he made, many see as Islamophobic, about Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London. Has he got a point that the Conservative Party is lurching towards, or at least allowing, people who express what many will see as bigotry and extremism to stay in the party?
Well, I think what Prime Minister's questions exposed there was that just as Keir Starmer asked the Prime Minister a number of questions, quite rightly, the Prime Minister pushed back on Keir's
and I'll ask
record
Emily
of
about
inaction.
that, but what about
to
the
your
claim
point about where the Conservative Party is, I think a point was made there about the party your parents voted for. Well, I think the Conservative Party is the party that my parents, that other people's parents voted for. It's still the party of Margaret Thatcher. It's still a party that believes in low taxes, in personal freedom, in personal responsibility, in taking tough decisions on our defence. And the key thing here is Mrs Thatcher had a plan. This Prime Minister's got a plan. Neil Kinnock didn't have a plan, and just as night follows day, Keir Starmer doesn't have a plan for the future. So I genuinely think we're setting out a very clear vision for our country.
We'll come on to that. As you say, the budget is coming up, importantly, next week. But why has it been such a problem to describe what Lee Anderson said, former Cabinet Minister Saeed Abbasi says, call it out for what it is, Islamophobia, saying that Sadiq Khan has been captured by Islamist mates in the capital?
Well, what I'll say is what Lee Anderson said was clearly wrong, and I'll go further than that, actually. I'll say it was offensive. In our politics, I do not believe that Lee Anderson is racist, personally. I do think he was wrong. I think what he said was wrong. And I think we do all, on both sides of the House, have a responsibility to talk in an appropriate and measured tone. And the key thing here is that Prime Minister moved within 24 hours to take swift action. What we've seen from Keir Starmer over his candidate in the upcoming by-election was dither, delay and indecision over a matter of days over some pretty vile reported comments.
Why did it take so long, Emily? I know it doesn't seem long in the whole scheme of things, but it did take a few days in order for the Labour Party to decide they were dropping their candidate, Azhar Ali. And in fact, initially, I think probably frontbenchers like you were told to go out and defend him.
It's a huge step, isn't it, to take away a candidate in a by-election? Yeah. Because it means that tomorrow there won't be a Labour candidate for people to vote for. So, that is a huge step. And I think that there was a debate about the way in which Azhar Ali had behaved in the past and the way he had been supportive, particularly of Jewish people. So, so I think it took a little bit longer. I think that it is extraordinary that even today, so many days later, when the Conservative Party have tried every single way of balancing angels on top of a pin, that someone like Ed can't say today that what was said by Anderson was racist and Islamophobic. How much more Islamophobic can it be to essentially say that all Muslims are extremists and that Sadiq Khan is a Muslim and so therefore he's friends with extremists? I mean,
But he was suspended. Worse? Lee Anderson was suspended.
I know, but call it out for what it is. Because it seems to me, look. Nobody pretends, I don't pretend, that the Labour Party didn't have a very difficult time in relation to dealing with anti-Semitism. And as somebody who was at the forefront of trying to fight that within my party, I know that what we had to do was you have to be able to identify it, you have to be able to call it out, and then you must deal with it. And when you get a leader who puts it in as his first priority, which is what Keir Starmer did, and you do start working on it, but they can't even agree, the Tories can't even agree on a definition of what Islamophobia
Emily, as you said, there have been difficulties difficulties, to put it lightly, within the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn's time. But, I mean, just to remind people what was said by the candidate, which was that Israel was warned about the massacre on October the 7th beforehand, but the Israelis allowed it so that they had the green light to do what they bloody want in Gaza, and went on to say Jewish parts of the media conspired to ensure Labour MP Andy MacDonald's suspension, no longer Labour MP, from the Labour Party. I mean, they're also pretty damning comments, aren't they? So, in a way, I mean, it's a plague on both your houses in terms of dealing with bigotry.
Joe, no, look. The point is, we have identified, we have accepted that we have a problem, and we are doing our utmost to deal with it. We have a definition, we have accepted it, we have called it out, and we are doing something about it. And that is not the same as a Conservative Party who can't even define Islamophobia, who aren't prepared to call it out, who get example and example. I mean, I can give you, look...
No, well, you don't have to, because Saeed Abbasi...
What has Sadiq faced? Remember when he first got elected, the dog whistle of Zach Goldsmith's original campaign. I mean, frankly, that was like subtle compared to what we're now getting against Sadiq.
Is there a problem with Islamophobia in the Conservative Party that you have failed to tackle head-on?
I think the Prime Minister has tackled this head-on and rapidly. Sadly, what we've seen recently...
But generally, more broadly,
what we've seen recently with Keir and his candidate in Rochdale is he hasn't changed the party. He hasn't made the changes that are needed. But I do want to pick up on something Emily said about Sadiq Khan.
Really, this is ridiculous.
Where actually I think we will have, may not be throughout this interview, but some common ground on this, because I've worked with Sadiq Khan in the past. We can disagree on a whole range of whether he's a good mayor, whether he's a bad mayor, whether he's let London down. But what was said was personal and it was offensive and it's wrong. And
it was racist, Ed. It was racist. It was
in politics,
Islamophobic.
we have a responsibility to think very carefully about what we say. I can disagree profoundly with Emily on this panel, but I can do it politely.
And do you disagree with me that it was racist?
I don't believe that Lee Anderson is racist.
All right, let me just show you the slate of candidates before we move on, who are standing in the by-election tomorrow. There it is, the Rochdale by-election. People will be voting tomorrow and we'll have the result, of course, overnight for Friday. Now, you can see there that Azhar Ali is down as Labour's candidate because it was too late to change the procedures and all the information that was going out. But that's why he's there still as the Labour candidate, even though he's been dropped, as Emily said. Let's have a look at this headline in The Guardian. Early prisoner release scheme extended indefinitely in England and Wales. Why is it being extended, Edward?
Well, this scheme, the ECSL scheme, which sees some prisoners with a lot of people not qualifying for it released 18 days early before the end of their sentence, is a temporary scheme. It remains a temporary scheme. It's one where decisions are made operationally by HMPPS, and it reflects exactly what Labour did between 2007 and 2010 with their scheme, with a crucial difference. There are a lot more safeguards, licence conditions and protections around what's happening here.
Right. I mean, there will be fears around some prisoners could be wrongly released early. You've mentioned a couple of the measures. Can you reassure the public that there won't be people released early who still pose a threat?
Well, this is a very carefully assessed scheme. There are a whole range of people who are not included in it, not eligible: terrorists, those who've committed sexual offences, those who've committed murder, obviously, those who've committed serious violent offences. And those, when they are released, and I say that only just over 2 weeks early, to enable them to transition back into normal life. They were going to be released anyway at that end point, but with a load of conditions, licence conditions and safeguards to make sure that if they breach any of those conditions, they'll be back inside.
Emily, reassured?
I think we should be treating prisoners. We should be sentencing people. We should be treating them once they're in prison on the basis of what is appropriate for them. We should look at the crime and we should look at what the appropriate sentence is. The problem that the government has is that they don't have enough prison places. And, you know, they had £4 billion that was earmarked for building more prison places. And the last I heard, and Ed may be able to update us, only £1.3 billion of that money has actually been spent. So after 14 years, they have failed to spend enough money on building more prison places. And so they are putting out letters to judges saying, please, before you sentence anyone, do bear in mind there aren't any prison places left.
And this is why the scheme was introduced. It was because of overcrowding. So is Emily right about the figures that you haven't spent the money?
There's a number of points. One, you are right about the pressure on our prisons, and the capacity pressure has been going up and up for a range of reasons. A lot more people on remand because of COVID and because of the criminal bar strike. People serving longer sentences, and parties of all complexions have voted for longer sentences. In terms of the supply and what we're doing about that, you've got to remember, Labour promised 3 tightened prisons, 7,500 places.
Sorry,
never built.
This is more than
what we are
14
doing,
years ago. Let's talk about now.
What we have done
and I'll come to
since
you.
inheriting Labour's failures in this space is we have put in place a large number of rapid deployment cells, over 800 new additional cells there. We've
What are rapid deployment cells?
Their additional
Do you mean
cells put
police
on
stations?
They're existing sites where we've built more prison places within them, Emily. In terms of new prisons, we've completed 2 and they're open. We've got a 3rd one in the process of being built.
All right.
We've just got planning permission for 2 more, and there is 1 more that is still going through the planning process. They are the 6 we said we built.
How much money would you put into building more capacity if you win the election?
Well, there's supposed to be £4 billion that's earmarked, so we would spend it. Listen, I feel sorry for Ed because he's only just become prison minister. We've had 14 years of failure. There've been so many different prison ministers. He can't build all the prison places that are necessary in the short time available that he's had. But really, he is nevertheless here answerable for the Conservative Party that's been in power for 14 years and hasn't built enough prison places. And it's all very well them making grand announcements, but if they don't spend the money, if they can't manage the country, if they can't lead the country, then can we have a general election, please? And we can get on and do it properly.
And what you notice there, Joe, is we've built thousands more prison places. Emily still won't answer the question of will she commit to additional prison places, how much will be spent for them, and how many more will Labour build?
There's £4 billion. There's £4 billion pounds. There's £4 billion pounds which is earmarked for building more prison places. So that's what we think.
So how many more prison places will be built with £4 billion? This magic £4 billion.
It depends what sort of prison places one builds. I don't know the details of this. I don't know whether they're going to be building more prison places in central London, for example, or miles away. So it depends. It depends on what the land prices are.
But that sounds like you haven't really thought about how many prison places you would build.
No, what we've said is that there's £4 billion allocated for building prison places, and what we want to do is there?
Sorry, can we get to? Is there £4 billion pounds?
Edward? We have a funded plan for 6 new prisons. We've said where they'll be. Right. We've said how many prison places will be in them. We've said where we'll build new house blocks, additional cell blocks, essentially. We've said where we'll build new rapid deployment cells, i.e. on spare space within existing prisons.
How long will all this take?
What we don't have, yet again, you've asked her anything, Emily doesn't have a plan for that. So she doesn't know how many, she doesn't know where.
So when you're going to...
So we've built 2.5 prisons already, the half one in construction. We've got 2 more that got planning permission last year and this year. And we've got 1 more that legitimately is going through a planning process where local people and others have objected. So quite rightly, it will go through that
So it's not your fault, it's the planning process.
No, so I'm saying we are building it. We're delivering on those prison places. It was always going to be a multi-year programme because building a prison takes a long time.
How much longer do you need?
And we've made clear we will continue to bring those prison places online year on year. But what we hear here is no plan from Emily.
Emily, we're about to talk about the budget. But broadly speaking, we know Labour doesn't want to spend any more money, rightly or wrongly, investing in public services or the sorts of expansion of prison places. So I don't understand why it'll be any different under Labour.
Because we believe that they've run out of energy. We believe they've run out of vision.
That's not the answer to my question. And what will you do? You're not going to do anything different because there's no money, we keep being told.
No, what we will do is we will have an idea, which they have none, when it comes to growing the economy. And that is such a central part of our policies.
It is, but it will take time.
Well, of course it will take time. But, when you've been bumping along with no growth at all over the years that the Tories have been in power, this will be a fresh start.
All right, so the prison places will be reliant on growth. I'm going to stop you there because we want to talk about...
Because there's £4 billion allocated in the budgets, at the moment.
Well, so we're going
when we look at the state of public services, we can see that there's £4 billion allocated.
A quick word about tomorrow's programme. We're always thinking ahead. We're going to be talking about the war in Ukraine because there have been a lot of stories about that this week, not least President Macron of France's suggestion about the possibility of deploying NATO troops in Ukraine. And we will pick up on all of that tomorrow from 12:15. The budget. Just how important is this moment, this big event in the political calendar for Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak?
Well, it's even more so because it's an election year. So they will be hoping, obviously, the Conservatives, that they can do something that not only cheers up their own MPs, but persuades voters that they are the party to back. Now, that doesn't always work. Tax cuts is the thing that I think a lot of Conservatives think will make the difference. There's already been a national insurance cut. There is some expectation there might be another one. Of course, this all comes down to the figures that have been given to the Treasury. How much money has he got to play with, if any? I mean, it is a strange sort of procedure, really, where the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, comes up with these figures every so often. The last lot will go in on Friday. I mean, it all feels a bit last minute, really. I mean, you'll know more about it, having, I think, were you in the Treasury for a little while? Briefly. And, this is how the Chancellor then decides what he does with this money. But obviously those figures change all the time. But, the expectation is, the things that we're hearing about are possibly national insurance cut, fuel duty freeze, of course, something that's very popular with the Tory MPs, of course, and then stuff around vapes, an extra duty on vapes to try and, make them more unaffordable for young people. So there's a bit of that, but I think, they want to try and move the dial, if you like. Something needs to change for Conservative MPs to feel like they've got something to go and sell on the doorstep.
Why is it more important to prioritise tax cuts than investing any money that might be available in public services?
Well, you've got to strike an appropriate balance, and Vic's absolutely right. A lot of this will depend on what headroom, what spare money, in a sense, within the budget the Chancellor has available, and then he can make choices about it. I don't want to speculate about what particular choice he'll make. But to your point, if you cut taxes, you will help drive growth. Now, that is
So said Liz Truss.
So said Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson. I mean, reducing taxes in an appropriate way can help stimulate investment in the economy and can help drive growth. Now, what I would say, and the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have been very clear that they want to see taxes come down. But you've got to do that in a responsible way, and that goes to Vicky's point about the OBR and others. You've got to do it in a balanced way. So what I don't know is what advice the Chancellor will be getting about what space he's got and therefore what decisions he'll make on that. But I'm pretty clear, as the Prime Minister and Chancellor have been, if there is scope, I know that they would like to see taxes lowered.
Right. If there is scope, would you like to see taxes lowered? Or the discussion we had before Prime Minister's questions in this studio is the dire financial situation that local authorities find themselves in. And people in Birmingham, this was particularly, but lots of other councils right across the country saying that they need more money. So why prioritise lowering taxes over putting more money into services, for instance, local councils?
Well, what you'll have heard me say there is I don't want to speculate on what balance the Chancellor will strike, because he's got to balance a whole load of different pressures and desires in the context of his budget. What I would say about local government finance, and I was a local councillor for almost 10 years, and I continue to take a very close interest in it. I know our local authority, mine in Leicestershire, does a fantastic job of making more money go as far as it will. But I do appreciate the pressures they're under around special educational needs, school transport, children's social care, adult social care. That's why we saw in the local government finance settlement just a few weeks ago not only an increase, but an additional £600 million found for local authorities to do that. So there is a recognition there about needing to support local authorities who do a fantastic job. But equally, when the Chancellor looks at this in the round, he'll know what space he's got, and then he'll have to make those decisions on how to balance
how to keep Tory MPs on side, or how to move the dial in the election. All right, well, stimulate growth in the economy. You want growth. It's what Labour talks about all of the time since Liz Truss was Prime Minister and left. If you want growth, and Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, says repeatedly that the tax burden, the overall tax burden, is far too high, presumably you'd welcome tax cuts too in the budget.
Look, I mean, who knows what Jeremy Hunt's going to do?
Nobody knows what Jeremy Hunt's going to do. Would you welcome lower taxes?
Well,
I mean, overall, it'll still be going up, but would you welcome a cut in national insurance?
It really depends. I mean, listen, I'm not going to speculate on what Jeremy Hunt is going to do. No, I'm not going to give comments on things when we don't even know what he's going to do yet. We do know that they seem to be implying that any fiscal headroom, that any extra money they find, any penny they find down the back of any sofa, they're going to either spend or they're going to give back in tax cuts. So there will be no. I mean,
where are they spending it? I don't remember seeing any spending.
Well, there's pressure on them to spend more money in local government. government. There's more pressure on them to spend money on defence. I mean, listen, what I'm saying is I'm not going to tell you what Labour would do, since we don't even know what the state of public finances is going to be.
No, I don't want to know what Labour will do.
If there is a general election,
but would you welcome, bearing in mind Rachel Reeves says that the overall tax burden is far too high, would you support another cut in national insurance?
Well, of course. I mean, listen, we have the highest tax burden that we've ever had. Yeah. I mean, and what happens is that the Conservatives will do is, for example, on their national insurance cut, they'll cut national insurance, there'll be a big hullabaloo. But people know that the amount that their taxes have gone up locally by way of council tax is the equivalent to the amount that we've had.
The overall tax burden is still going to rise, even with these tax cuts. Why not be honest?
We've been through an energy crisis. I would like to see that come down, but in a responsible way. The challenge we see here is we've got a plan to do that. Wow. What we saw with the chaos over the £28 billion pledge on the green economy from the Labour Party is they don't have a plan. And I'm afraid what we do need now is a clear plan. We've got a plan and we need to stick with it.
Right. I mean, Vicky, over tax cuts, whatever happens, whatever Jeremy Hunt announces, it'd be very difficult for Labour to reverse or say they would reverse those tax cuts. And the Institute for Fiscal Studies has said they want to see where the axe will fall if there are tax cuts.
Yeah, well, that's the big question there's going to be, is about future public spending. Now, there's already talk of there's going to have to be a spending review at some point quite soon, but that's what everyone wants to know, is it's all very well cutting taxes now, but what does that mean for public sector pay and public sector spending further down? Yeah, and they're the ones where the NHS is pretty protected when it comes to spending. Lots of money is being spent, but very, very much unclear about down those future years. You see all the predictions. What happens then? I mean, of course, the Conservative Party at the moment maybe not quite looking at that. They're looking at a bit of a more short-term approach as we get.
But Vicky, we also don't know if there's going to be another budget this year.
Well,
we don't know
that's true. That's true. It could be the last big sort of financial event, but we don't know exactly when the election is going to be either. But that's all we have time for today. Thank you to all of my guests for joining me, and I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15. Bye-bye.